Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Intune Education Partner Ask the Expert series. So, we've had conversations previously about device based subscriptions for Office 365 and how to deploy those in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Today, we are looking at how to set up a cloud managed gateway in SCCM. We understand that with staff and students not being on site, there is increased interest into some access and control of those devices that are no longer on-prem. With no further ado, let's get started. I am so excited that I got Scott Ellison to join our expert series today. Scott was my onboarding buddy when I joined Microsoft Education. He brought me over. He taught me all of the stuff that I now know and really gave me the foundation to move forward in understanding Intune and how it's solving a lot of our customer issues around slow logins, delays, updates, all of those things. And about 2 years ago, Scott and I's sole mission was traveling around the country, getting schools excited about modern management with Intune for education. And now, with the world as it is today, we hear from a lot of customers and a lot of partners talking to our customers about embracing cloud-based device management, or at least having some sort of access into their devices that are no longer on-prem, but have gone home with staff and students. And school IT leaders are looking to control some of the settings, some of the updates, some of the applications, or at the very least have visibility. So I'm super excited to have Scott with us today. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here. The first place that I would start in any type of planning scenario for your CMG is to review the docs on docs.microsoft.com. Definitely, there are some things that you do need to be aware of, what the CMG can do and what it cannot do. So, just a couple of quick things that you need to be aware of. Having a cloud management gateway does require an Azure subscription. If you want to test CMG first, you can always go out to the Azure website and sign up for a free trial. We provide a $200 credit so that you can start experimenting with the CMG. You can also do other Azure services there as well. The CMG does address definitely some scenarios where for Windows device management, for both a hybrid Azure AD join device and also an Azure Active Directory join device. So the scenarios that, and it will support both your Windows 8.1 clients and your Windows 10 clients. And Windows 7 clients, remember, are now out of support, so hopefully you're not running any Windows 7 clients in your environment. But things that the CMG can leverage are software updates, your endpoint protection, your inventory and your client status, compliance settings, all of your third-party software distribution, as well as so that would be any of software updates to things like Java, iTunes, Chrome. Any line of business applications that you have. And it can also do an in-place upgrade from one version of Windows 10 to a newer version of Windows 10, like one going from 1809 to 1909, a major feature update. So we can run task sequences over the internet. So it's really good just to review this typology page here, look at the different scenarios that we can cover, and then also understand that there are some limitations on the cloud management gateway. So for example, you cannot use client push. We cannot push a client to a device that's over the cloud management gateway. We do not have support for Wake on LAN or Mac, Linux, and Unix clients. And then there currently isn't BitLocker support. So there are some scenarios that CMG does not support. But for most scenarios that you need to do software distribution or do patch management, we can do those through a cloud management gateway. So just read through this documentation. There's also some things that you need to know about certificates. We do require either a PKI infrastructure to be in place, so there does need to be certificates, or you can use a third-party cert with enhanced HTTP, which is a feature of Config Manager. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to my site server. And Joe, hopefully you can see this, and everybody else can as well. And we'll just go through our the setup and things that you need to be aware of before you're as you set up your CMG. Now, the CMG does require to have some certificates available for use. Now, you can either use a your local PKI, public key infrastructure, for the certificates. So if your devices already have a client auth certificate on them and you have a web server, you can generate a certificate for your from your PKI, and you'll need to use a web server cert. But you can generate that certificate and then use that for the communication between your clients and your cloud management gateway. Now, let's say you are in a scenario where you don't necessarily have certificates deployed to your devices. Maybe you don't have a PKI infrastructure. You can still use a third-party certificate to enable Cloud Management Gateway. Now, the way that you're going to want to do this is to enable a feature in Configuration Manager called Enhanced HTTP. And the way you would do that is you would go into the properties of your site. This will bring up our primary site properties. We would want to click on the Communication Security tab and then check the box here for Use Configuration Manager Generated Search for HTTP Site Systems. So again, this is will help also facilitate that communication as well, but you do need to enable this box if you are going to use a third-party primary cert. Any of the major certificate vendors like DigiCert will be fine. It is also supported in Configuration Manager with the CMG that you can leverage a wildcard cert as well. So if you already have a wildcard SSL cert, potentially for your domain, and you do the correct DNS entries, that will also be an option for you as well. So once you enable the HTTP, that also is going to light up some other functions around co-management, which we'll be doing a video in about a week or two on co-management between Configuration Manager and Intune. But that also lights up some other scenarios where you could do things like sync your collections into an Azure AD group. That's one of the requirements. That feature needs to be enabled for that. Now, Cloud Management Gateway has been around for a long time. It's been around for about 3 or 4 years. It was initially in our 16.10 release of Configuration Manager, and over time, the Cloud Management Gateway has been modernized to take advantage of things like Azure Resource Manager and all of the new features. We've merged the role of the Cloud Distribution Point into the Cloud Management Gateway. But the functionality and what it does pretty much has remained pretty consistent, and we've been able to add more functionality to it. So let me first start going on what do we need to do once we've enabled our HTTP and we have our Azure subscription and we have our cert available. What do we need to do from the Configuration Manager side to enable Cloud Management Gateway? So for the most part, all of the actions that you're going to take are going to be done within the Configuration Manager console. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to enable your Azure AD tenant to communicate with your Configuration Manager site server. So one of the things that is a full admin, and you will also need credentials that are global administrators, is to do what we call a cloud attach, or be able to have your site server talk to Azure Active Directory. So if you come in here under the administration node and right click on Azure Services, it will start a wizard that allows you to do what's called a cloud attach. So you can configure your Azure services, and this is where you add your Azure Active Directory tenant to your Configuration Manager site. This allows your Configuration Manager clients to authenticate to the site using Azure Active Directory. So I'm not going to go through the wizard, but let me just kind of show you what this creates. So as part of the setup, it is going to create 2 applications within Azure AD. One is a web application that will serve as a web app, and then we also create a native client app for that is used for authentication. So we create these two applications here and part of Azure Active Directory. You will need to be a global admin in order to create these, or have someone log in from the Config Manager console with global admin credentials. Once those Azure AD apps are created, then you will be able to perform discovery on Azure Active Directory. This is where we can go and we can look for Azure AD users. We can also look for Azure AD groups, and then we can create, once those resources are discovered, they are stored in our Configuration Manager database. And then from that point, we can run reports on those. We can build collections. We have those resources available to us. And then also you can enable the option if you want to do an Azure AD group collection sync. So what this basically entails is it gives us the ability to sync our Configuration Manager collections and merge those into an Azure Active Directory group. So once we onboard our tenant, as you can see here, I just called mine Azure AD Discovery, but you can name this anything you like. You'll see that it has the associated cloud service. You'll see that down here in the lower portion of the Config Manager console that I have both Discovery enabled for my Azure AD users and my Azure AD groups. Now, as far as configuring how often Discovery is to run, that's based on your organizational preferences. I usually recommend, depending on the size of your site and the load that you already currently have, once a week should be sufficient. Just understand that we also do Delta discoveries every 5 minutes, so it should pick up any new or modified attributes during that time. So once we then have our Azure AD tenant connected, then we can proceed with installing our Cloud Management Gateway. Now, the next thing that we'll want to do is come down here to the Cloud Management Gateway and run the wizard to be able to add a CMG to our network. So all of our communication traffic goes out over port 443. There aren't that many different ports that you need to open up. Most organizations will allow most network traffic to the internet on outbound. So what will end up happening is we'll go through the Cloud Management Gateway wizard, and we're going to be asked to sign in using our Azure credentials. So as you can see here, I'm going to take a quick second here, and we are going to let this pop in here. And I'm going to use my account here.
So Scott, you're signing in with a global admin here?
So at this particular account that I'm signing in with on this Azure subscription is a is not necessarily a global admin. In my environment, I am a global admin, but the individual that is signing in to set up the Configuration Manager gateway also needs to have a contributor permission that is available to deploy the Cloud Management Gateway service. Excellent question, Joe. So it does need to be, yes. So you need, please sign as administrator account to access your subscription. Config Manager will obtain the subscription information and configure the contributor permission required to deploy the service. Because again, in certain organizations, you might have some folks that are in different roles. Sorry about that. Okay. So as you can see here, I've started the Cloud Management Gateway wizard. And if you look at it right here, a Cloud Management Gateway can be deployed in both your Azure public cloud, and it can also be deployed in your U.S. government cloud. So most education customers are going to work in an Azure public cloud. Most of your regular K-12s or most of your higher education customers will be in a public cloud scenario. There may be some university projects that may be required to use government cloud, so you can also deploy the Config Manager gateway in the Azure Gov Cloud. When you sign in here with an administrator account, you do need to have a Config Manager. Will, like I said, will find the application that you created back when you attached your Azure Active Directory tenant, and then it will also here find the subscription that is linked to your account. So once we do that, we'll click next. And this is the pages pretty much where we have the setup of the configuration manager gateway. So the first thing that it's going to ask is you need your certificate file for the PKI for this cloud service. So as you can see here, it's going to ask for a PFX file. So this was the one that I originally set up my cloud management gateway with. So I'm going to click on this. And as you can see, I did export out the private key, which is important when you're fulfilling the certificate request and you import it into your server that you made the request. Do export out the private key. And so it will ask for a password, and you'll need to password protect that out. And so if you'll notice here, there's a couple of things that it's looking for. So first is you will import your certificate, and then you will have to give it a service name. So this is important. Now, we default, when you create the cloud management gateway, it will default to a service name using whatever you name it, cloudapp.net. So if you don't plan on using an alternate DNS name, like in this case, I've used a alternate name, Scholar Scout CMG.scholarscout.net. If you want to use an alternate DNS name, make sure that you put that in your certificate. You'll also want to use your deployment name in that cert as well. So in this particular, that is not required. This is something I chose to do. So again, you don't have to necessarily use your vanity domain, but you're more than welcome to. But just make sure that you make it as subject alternate name in the certificate request. So again, with CMG being a PaaS application, we're going to all services are going to end with cloudapp.net. When you then create the service, you're going to be asked if you want to use an existing or create a new resource group. So let's say in this particular case, I wanted to create a new resource group. One of the things that's important is selecting what region that you want to deploy your cloud management gateway in. Now, for most K-12, since most of your devices are going to be localized, meaning they'll be in the general county or maybe that you support, we typically recommend that you pick the data center that would be closest to your physical location. If you do support devices that might be around the world, you can deploy multiple instances of cloud management gateways to different regions. So, but for most cases, most organizations will just have one cloud management gateway in the region that's probably closest to them. So in this particular case, I could pick East US. And again, you can also, in this case, you can use an existing resource group. What a resource group is that's going to be a collection of your VMs, your virtual machines, your networking, and all the things that are associated with that particular instance of an application that you're running. So you can pick you can use an existing one or create a new one. And then you can also decide how many VM instances that you want to create. Now, one thing that's important is because this is a platform as a service application, you don't have to worry about installing the virtual machine or configuring the operating system. Microsoft takes care of that for you. So any of the patching that needs to be done to the operating system, that's all handled by us. So again, we're just providing the platform. You're just enabling a service on it. With the number of instances on a virtual machine, one instance should be enough for most organizations, depending on your size. If you get up above 20, 30,000, you may need to add additional virtual machine instances to handle your load. Though it's a very scalable, so by just clicking the up arrow, I can scale the number of virtual machine instances that have to be enabled. But the first time that you deploy your CMG, you probably just want to start out with one instance, do your testing, see if you need to add more instances based on your performance load or how much communication that you have going back and forth, and then you can scale that up or scale it down depending on the time of year. Now, what's also very cool about a cloud management gateway is a cloud management gateway can also function as a distribution point. So we have back several releases ago with Config Manager, they built the CMG functionality in the CMG that it can function as a distribution point as well, so that it can also serve up content through utilizing the Azure storage. So again, I'm using a certificate before, so it won't allow me to proceed because of the service name. So I'm going to cancel out and show you a couple of other things that screens in the setup process that you will need to go through. So again, as you can see here in this setup process, I use the resource group called Upgrade Readiness. I have my CMG is configured to also function as a cloud DP. I have one VM instance, and of course, here's the certificate that I've imported. And again, in my case, I used a third-party certificate, and then I also gave it used my vanity domain as the service name for the instance. If you do choose to use that vanity domain, you will need to create a DNS in your DNS. Whoever your DNS provider is, you will need to create an A record and a CNAME record for that as well. Now, in the Alerts tab, this is where you can set up your monitoring of the data transfer in your storage for your cloud management gateway. So for the first section here is that you can turn on a 14-day threshold, and you can see set an alert to stop the service if you reach a critical threshold. The thing that's important to understand about the cost of a cloud management gateway is that you have not only the number of A2 virtual machines, but it's also your egress of data from the Azure data center, as well as the amount of storage that is being used by your cloud distribution point. So you can set alerts for both the cloud management gateway and your storage.
So these are going to be like guardrails to make sure that they're not
Absolutely.
spending more than they want to spend.
Absolutely. So, if you're in a K-12 type scenario, in most cases, you would probably during the school year, you'll be upping the number of virtual machines that you have. Maybe in the summertime, since you're refreshing those devices or storing those devices, you can scale back that virtual machine as well.
And a school can change how many virtual machines, even if the device is off-site, or does the device need to be on-site in order to get the new policy that there's multiple VMs?
The device does not have to be on-site in order to get the device isn't going to know anything about the number of virtual machines running in the background. So the purpose of the virtual machines is just to be able to handle all of your client connections and be able to load balance. And be able to handle the capacity of connections to the cloud management gateway.
So as long as CMG is already deployed, the IT administrator can turn it up and turn it down as far as features and bandwidth without actually seeing the device.
Correct.
Fantastic.
Yeah. The device just does have to talk to the management point, to get the initial policy. So it does need to be on your internal network, or script would need to be run to modify the client installation properties to make the client aware that it is able to communicate with the cloud management gateway. Now, we do have a new feature in the 2202 release of Configuration Manager where you can do a bulk token enrollment using a workgroup device, and it can register over a cloud management gateway. So that's a new feature. It recently just came out. I haven't had time to play around with that, but for the most part, initially, to get the initial configuration, most devices have to be on your network to get the policy update to know that there is a CMG available for it to communicate with. And then on the content tab, this is where this is going to show what content is currently deployed to our distribution point. So here I just have a configuration manager client package. A couple of things that I want to talk about specifically related to content. Most of the content that you should store on a CMG should only be either related to line of business applications or third-party patching. All of your config manager clients should be, that utilize the CMD, should be configured to go out to Windows Update to pull the content down. And then if you're managing Office Pro Plus, you would definitely want to make sure that that's configured to use the content delivery network that's available. That way it will save on your CMG cost, and it will also save on your storage cost as well. Now, once you also have this, so when you're ready to deploy the CMG, if you want to monitor the deployment, you can come into CMTrace and you can open up a log called cloudmanmgr.log. This is going to be found in the Program Files Microsoft Configuration Manager logs folder. This log can be used to monitor the deployment of your CMG and then also just ensure that your CMG is running appropriately. So definitely one, if you're into the Config Manager log files, you can see it as it deploys and you can see if any errors are in here. So again, this is one of the log files that you definitely want to monitor when you're going through your deployment. So once we have our Config Manager, our CMG deployed, you will see down here that it will pop up here in this list. Again, you can have multiple CMG instances, but for most organizations, one CMG instance should be sufficient to meet most use cases. And then, of course, you should have a status of ready here as well. Now, a couple of other things that will need to be installed as part of the CMG. So on a site system, which could be either your site server or it could be another configuration manager server that holds a specific config manager role like a management point, you do need to install the Cloud Management Gateway connection point. You will just come into the server you want to deploy it to and click on Add Site Systems and start the wizard, and that will take you through the role that you would want to install that server on. Once that role has been enabled, then you will need to come into two other site system roles. So first of that being your management point. And you will want to allow your management point to be able to use the CMG for any of its traffic. And then you'll also want to use that do the same with the software update point. Again, check the box to allow Config Manager Cloud Management Gateway traffic. So this enables both of these site systems to accept traffic from the Cloud Management Gateway. So pretty much at that point, what we've done, just to recap, we have attached Azure AD up to our configuration manager, or we've attached our config manager site up to Azure Active Directory. We've deployed our Cloud Management Gateway, and then we've configured, we have deployed the Cloud Management Gateway connection points site system role, and we've enabled our management point software update point to accept traffic from the Cloud Management Gateway. At that point, we're then able to enable our client settings. So what's important here with the client settings is this is going to allow us to set which devices can actually use the Cloud Management Gateway. So if you can see right here, I'm going to go into, I have a separate client settings policy that I've deployed to a specific group of devices. Again, this is totally optional, but this is just how I set mine up in my test environment. So if you notice here under Cloud Services, we have a few settings. So one, we can enable access to a cloud distribution point. So this will allow any of our devices who are not currently on our internal network to access our cloud distribution point. And then, of course, we can enable clients to use the CMG. So again, this could be, you could target this to, let's say you have a collection that had all laptops and didn't have any kind of desktop based on the chassis. We can come in here and we can specify which devices we actually want to have access to our Cloud Management Gateway. So again, come in here and configure your device settings for that. Once you're finished with your device settings and the Cloud Management Gateway has received its policy, the way that you can tell that you successfully have deployed your Cloud Management Gateway is look at a particular client. So in this particular case, you can go into your control panel and you'll be able to find your Cloud Management Gateway targeted to a specific collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my hybrid Azure AD join, or my hybrid Azure AD join devices. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we're going to log in to a Windows 10 device here. And we're going to open up the control panel.
Hey, Scott, quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you Batman?
I am Batman. So if you noticed here on this video, or in this virtual machine, I have the Config Manager client properties up. You will, if I click on the network tab, you'll see here that here is the URL for my cloud management gateway. So this client is in that collection that I deployed my client agent settings to, and you can see right here that SCCM is my cloud management gateway and that it's in there. Now, one way that you can definitely test to ensure that your cloud management gateway is communicating correctly is if you look down here under your connection type. Now, again, this device right now is a virtual machine. It's on an internal network, but you could also test this off your network, or you could do it with an Azure AD join device. You could say that this device is currently internet. So again, this right now is intranet, so it's internal. But then if you took it off your network and didn't do any kind of communication, it should say internet. So the CMG, our CMG is up and running. Our clients can start communicating. And at this point, it's really, you can start deploying your software. You can start doing your policy. You can come in here to your assets and compliance and be able to see all of your devices that are online. So these two devices are here, even though they're on the internet. If they were on the internet, we then could run our remote actions on these devices. We could then trigger hardware inventory, software inventory. And again, there are some limitations that you cannot do with CMG. For example, you cannot run the CM pivot information. That is not something you could do. We currently do not support using the Config Manager remote control, although that is in one of our technical previews right now and has been for some time. That feature currently is still not in a production build of Configuration Manager. One last thing I do want to point out, especially as more organizations have gone to remote device management, you might have more users today on using a virtual private network than they have previously. There's a couple of things that you can do to take some of that load off of your VPN infrastructure, and that is configure any clients that are on the VPN to be able to use your cloud resources. So if I were to go back into here under administration and expand out hierarchy configuration and look at boundaries, we can actually come into our boundaries here and set up some options. Sorry, it's under boundary groups. We can actually set up our clients to be able to use cloud resources. So what we would do is want to come here to boundary groups, click on our options tab, and then check this box here. It says prefer cloud-based sources over on-prem sources. This way, if we do have a client that roams within the boundaries of our VPN subnet, for example, we can have that box checked, and that will tell the client to go out to use the cloud management gateway instead of our internal distribution points, and therefore we can prevent our devices from saturating our VPN links or internet connections out to the internet. So this was a quick overview on Cloud Management Gateway. Again, we're going to be posting links down in the description, things that you need to plan for as part of your Cloud Management Gateway deployment. This also will set you up for future cloud attached scenarios with Configuration Manager. So in our next video that I'm going to be doing with Joe, we're going to do an overview of co-management and what workloads that you can move back and forth between Config Manager and Intune. And this will also enable some other scenarios. For example, let's say that you have an Azure Active Directory join device You've enrolled this into Intune, and now you want Intune to be able to become part of your configuration manager site. The Cloud Management Gateway allows for that scenario to occur because the config manager client can be deployed via Intune, and then it can register back through the Cloud Management Gateway, and then be both enrolled in both the Intune service, and then also be part of a configuration manager at the same time.
So Cloud Managed Gateway to me seems like it has a very low floor, high ceiling. It's very easy to get into. An education customer does need to have an Azure subscription, but they can sign up for a free $200 trial, right? And with that trial, they can go in and start to experiment with how they would set that up and configure it. And they can keep things really light as far as Azure usage, especially if you're trying to control things like Windows Update and Office updates, all of which can come through our own content delivery networks and don't need to be locally hosted by the school. So they can keep the amount of data really light, but still have some reach into these devices that are off-prem. Something that schools need to be aware of, and our partners who are working with schools, is that the devices need to be on site in order to get that CMG updated policy. Otherwise, right, they're not going to know that this new CMG exists for them. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's a very good summary. And just a couple of points. If they also have a virtual private network or VPN service deployed to those devices, and they have their VPN subnets within the boundaries of the config manager site, and the VPN subnets are allowed to talk to config manager as well, then they should be able to get that policy through the VPN. But again, in most cases, especially in a K-12, most schools are not going to have a VPN deployed, a VPN solution deployed. And really the whole point of a CMG, and I guess why we're doing a lot of these videos now, is because, as you know, Joe, we're both living in some uncertain times. We haven't, as we've both been involved in education for, you yourself being a former teacher, we haven't really seen this type of environment come up. We haven't lived through this. So we're doing these videos here today to really give our K-12s and higher ed customers things to think about and what they need to plan for, because, we don't know how long this is going to be going on. Hopefully we can return to somewhat version of normal now, but I think it's also going to enable new scenarios, especially as we may have more of our faculty and staff working from home on a more regular basis now than previously we've had. So don't think about it in a student device scenario, but also think about this in a faculty and staff scenario as well, that being able to manage those devices, those teacher devices that go home over the summertime during a regular school year, you have no reach to those devices. This provides that reach that you need. So, and you brought up a lot of good key points. You can keep this really light. You don't have to put any type of content out there on the Cloud Management Gateway. We have a lot of customers that don't, but one of the things they like is the ability to be able to show compliance reports. They can get their patching up, and they have they can get a much better, cleaner picture reporting, because they have a mechanism when devices aren't on the network to be able to communicate in.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. I think our partners are better off for it. I know a lot of our customers are tuning into this YouTube channel as well to get these videos, just because it's so important to them right now in order to respond to the current world, as well as prepare for anything else to happen next and to future-proof themselves. So thank you so much, Scott, for joining, and I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about how to establish co-management, linking SCCM to Microsoft Endpoint Manager to get the best of both worlds. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Joe. It was my pleasure to be on your show.